They call it the news. It's meant to inform you. But do you ever really feel informed? Here, we look for the signal in all that static. I'm Caesar, and welcome to Strange Frequency. Tonight's first article, Loneliness and the Streaming Experience. A recent study from the University of Florida examined how loneliness shapes perception inside live streaming environments. These researchers focused on social presence, not content nor ideology, but perception. Specifically, how individuals who report feeling lonely interpret digital cues on platforms like Twitch. Live streaming occupies a hybrid space. It is a broadcast at scale, but delivered in a tone that feels oddly personal. And I think it comes down to the talent of the streamer themselves. Some are much better at it than others, as to the experience you get. The study found that loneliness intensifies perceived connection. Small gestures register as meaningful. A username read aloud, a direct glance into the camera, a casual acknowledgement in chat. For individuals already experiencing isolation, these micro interactions can carry some serious weight. The experience can feel reciprocal, even if structurally it's anything but. The researchers draw a careful distinction. Streaming can reduce feelings of loneliness in the short term, but perceived connection does not equal mutual relationship. The environment simulates closeness. It does not require reciprocity. The asymmetry is central. The platform compresses psychological distance, but it does not distribute emotional investment evenly. Here's what we know. Digital environments are not neutral. They're designed. High-definition video, real-time chat, algorithmic reinforcement. The system is built to feel intimate. Intimacy increases engagement, and engagement sustains these platforms. Loneliness does not create the architecture, but the architecture responds to loneliness. If a lonely viewer finds comfort in mediated presence, the system has little incentive to disrupt that loop. It's as simple as that. Attention is valuable. Time on platform is valuable. Predictable emotional returns keep users consistent. Artificial closeness scales globally, even when reciprocity does not. The tension? When simulated presence becomes ambient, solitude feels heavier. Silence feels abnormal. Distinction and disconnection feel sharper, because there's always somewhere else you can log in. The question is not whether streaming is good or bad. The question is what happens when simulation becomes substitution. When engineered intimacy becomes the default experience of connection, expectation shifts quietly, and quiet shifts are the ones that endure. That's not panic, just pattern recognition, and that's tonight's cultural signal. And our next article, The Two-Party Trap, Power and Polarization. The article examines how modern political systems reinforce division through structure rather than emotion. The central claim is not that voters are irrational, it is that incentives shape behavior. In a two-party framework, political competition narrows into a binary. Two dominant brands, two national machines, two permanent camps competing for control of the same institutional corridors. The article argues that polarization is reinforced by design. Primary elections reward ideological loyalty. Media ecosystems reward confrontation. Campaign financing flows through centralized party infrastructure. As a result, opposition becomes politically valuable. Compromise becomes strategically risky. The system does not require chaos, it merely rewards conflict more consistently than it does cooperation. The author suggests that when competition is limited to two viable entities, political identity seems to harden. Nuance shrinks, middle positions weaken, voters are sorted into opposing narratives. This dynamic produces visible rivalry, but it also produces predictability, which is probably the most important thing to take from this article. Two stable pillars of power, two pathways for influence, and two gatekeeping structures that determine viability. Here's what we know. Binary systems are easier to manage than fragmented ones. Two major pipelines of authority are easier to monitor, easier to fund, and easier, much easier, to influence than, say, a dozen viable smaller movements. Large donors do not prefer chaos, they prefer clarity. Major corporations do not prefer volatility, they prefer predictability. If political viability runs through two central structures, access runs through two central structures. Lobbying concentrates, regulatory negotiation concentrates, narrative control concentrates. This does not require secret meetings, it requires shared incentives. When stability benefits institutions, structures that provide stability endure the longest. Two parties arguing publicly can still operate within shared institutional guardrails. The rivalry is visible, the continuity is structural. Here's a little bit of tension. A competitive ecosystem with many viable movements is harder to steer, harder to forecast, harder to stabilize. A binary ecosystem is cleaner, simpler to map, easier to influence indirectly. When options narrow, gatekeeping strengthens. When gatekeeping strengthens, outsider pathways shrink. The public experiences polarization. Institutions experience continuity. The distinction is worth examining, not emotionally, structurally. Seeing who benefits where. You feel this in almost every aspect of life. And that's tonight's institutional signal. Before we begin with our last article, we recently did a poll on X and asked what topics you want to cover most. We didn't get a lot of votes, but modern folklore received the most. So occasionally we'll step into the mythic layer a little bit. After all, the show is called Strange Frequency. So for tonight, we're going to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. According to NPR, the small river town continues to host an annual Mothman Festival. Thousands gather, statues are photographed, merchandise is sold, and a winged figure from 1966 remains very much alive in local memory. The original sightings date back to November of 1966. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes, large wings. Over time, the descriptions have varied, but they varied slightly. The central image has always held a humanoid silhouette watching, silent, often near abandoned industrial areas. The sightings continued for over a year through 1966. Then, in December 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed during rush hour traffic. 46 people died. In hindsight, the legend fused with that tragedy. Some residents linked the sightings to disaster, an omen, a warning, or simply coincidence layered with fear. NPR notes that today the town embraces the mythology positively, not in panic, but as identity. Here's what we know. Industrial towns in decline produce uncertainty. Uncertainty produces anxiety. Anxiety looks for shape. Mothman gave shape to the unease, a watcher in the dark, a presence before the collapse. Not necessarily supernatural, but symbolically precise. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. When tragedy strikes, we search backward for signals. Anything that felt unusual becomes meaningful. Anything unexplained becomes prophetic. The legend persists because it explains nothing directly, but it frames that fear. And fear is easier to carry when it has a face, especially a dark Mothman face with red eyes. The Mothman Festival continues each year. Families attend, vendors set up booths. A once frightening figure becomes communal folklore. What began as dread turned into tourism. What began as omen become mascot. And maybe that's the quiet lesson. We do not just fear the unknown, we domesticate it. We sculpt it. We give it wings and red eyes and a statue downtown. Because even mystery feels safer when it has a name, and that is tonight's signal. That concludes tonight's broadcast. Links to all the articles used will be in the description below. And as always, if you've seen anything strange or unexplained, feel free to reach out in the comments or by email. Until next time, we'll keep listening for the signal.